In 2017, the rural town of Walcha, New South Wales, Australia, was rocked when a very popular farmer, Matt Dunbar, was found deceased inside his home. His new partner had been on the phone to emergency services and was performing CPR. Was this just a tragic rural happening, or was something more sinister at play? Well, let's put the story of the rich farmer and the widow of Walcha to the pub test. I just have to give a warning here. Viewer discretion is advised. If self-harm, the taking of one's life, is something that triggers you, then click off this video now, because it does play a major part throughout this entire story. So look after yourself. If you need to, jump back in for the next video. But for those of you who are hanging around here, I'm just going to start by giving a brief rundown on Walcha itself. It is a small town of about 3,000 people. The name Walcha itself is an Aboriginal word meaning sun, or water, or deep water. The actual name of the meaning of that term Walcha is now lost to history. But it has developed into a very rich rural agricultural community. It's great for farming. It's on a slightly elevated area in New South Wales, and so it gets the cold winters, but then you don't get that extreme heat in summer. And so you have some really nice area for farming. As well as that, it's a great place for trout fishing. And if you are ever driving through there, there's plenty of nice national parks with gorges and waterfalls and everything around this New England area of New South Wales where Walcha is situated on. It's also got a bit of an art scene now too, they say. I haven't seen it myself. I have been to Walcha, and I just want to say I don't know anyone personally involved in this story. But I do know the town of Walcha. Also, just another thing, the property Pandora where these events happened is on Thunderbolt's Way. And you might wonder, well, what's Thunderbolt's Way about? Does that mean they get lots of storms? Well, no. It was named after a bushranger. In other places of the world, I think they're called outlaws. But this was the gentleman bushranger, Fred Ward. He has quite a rich history. He had this escape from a penal colony, and it was around the 1863, I think, to 1870. He was robbing people all the time in this spot until he eventually got captured or shot, basically. And in a town nearby, Uralla, they do a reenactment, or at least they used to before COVID. I'm not too sure if that event still happens, but they used to reenact the capturing of Thunderbolt in the city of Uralla, or the town of Uralla. But how he got the name Thunderbolt was he broke into a place one time, and so the story goes, the person said he came in like a thunderbolt, and Fred Ward said, "Nice, call me Captain Thunderbolt." And that name stuck, and now there's a highway going through this area known as Thunderbolt's Way. But getting down to the story, and this is very important, they talk about the rich farmer and the widow of Walcha. And that's always how this is portrayed. And it's fair enough, but it has to be explained what people mean by a rich farmer. Now, Matt Dunbar was adopted, but he was adopted to a farming family, and I believe they were like a third generation farming family in the area. And his parents, adoptive parents, did split up, but he stayed on the property with his father, and then when his father passed away, he inherited the property. Now, the property itself was worth, I should say, back in 2017, I apologise. In 2017, it was worth $3.5 million to $4 million. So you'd think that's a lot of money. But remembering this was inherited land, it had been passed down through generations, so none of the family had ever cashed in the value of the property. And so a farmer could be asset rich, but cash poor. And so farmers are still generally relying on good seasons to keep that cash flow going, to keep the business afloat. Sure, they could sell up, but there is massive pressure on doing that. You can feel like a failure if you are the one to leave the land, and no more will of your generations ever farm that community. And a lot of the farmers feel like custodians. They don't feel like they own a particular spot of land as well. So it's safe to say, and during this we'll find out, that Matt Dunbar did have some cash flow problems, which could have led to some of these issues going on. But that's not unique in the rural setting. As well as what is not unique, unfortunately, suicide is an issue in rural Australia, even amongst farmers. And people look at them and think, but they have everything. They have the lifestyle. They could sell up and have plenty of money. But there is pressure on these ones, just as it is on every other part of the community as well. Now, the point of all of that was because it does have a bearing on this case. Because Matt Dunbar was found on an August night, which is winter in Walcha, so it was a cold evening. He's found in his bedroom with a bag over his head and a bottle of helium attached to that bag. And as mentioned, his partner has come in and seen the scene and rang 000, which is our emergency number in Australia. So then first responders are on the way to the scene while she's performing CPR. But what led up to this event that evening? Well, Natasha Darcy had been living in Walcha for a few years, and she was well known in the tiny town. She'd moved there when her husband got assigned there as a paramedic. And at the time they had 2 children. Now, some events happen in their life which we will look at a bit later, but they have split up. They're no longer together. And it's at that point that Natasha Darcy starts making overtures towards Matt Dunbar. Went out and visited him on his sheep farm. And before too long, they have got involved in a relationship. And something happens, which I'm holding back for now, and you'll understand why, because there will be a trial we're discussing, and I'm just holding back information that was not presented at the trial. But she went away for 18 months to Sydney, whilst the children stayed in Walcha, and it would seem that the ex-husband and Matt Dunbar were basically trying to share in helping the kids, whilst Natasha is no longer there. But when she leaves Sydney, she moves back to Walcha and moves in with Matt Dunbar on the property Pandora. And now, at this point in 2017, she has 3 children, but is still sharing raising arrangements with her ex-husband. And I say ex, even though I believe they were never divorced, but she uses that term, so I'm, for the sake of simplicity, going to say that. But it's the ex-husband who actually has guardianship over the children as well. So he is very actively involved in those kids' lives, which, according to Matt Dunbar's friends, caused a little bit of angst in the relationship, we could say, with his new partner, Natasha Darcy. But oddly, during the time she's away in Sydney, a couple of Matt's mates confirm that she's been on the phone to him getting the will changed so that he now assigns the property in the event of his death over to Natasha Darcy. 6 weeks, though, before the events of that night in August occurred, Matt Dunbar's rung one of his mates and basically said goodbye, that he was going out into the paddock and he's not coming back. And he took one of his guns with him. So this mate of his rings Natasha saying, what's going on with Matt? What do we need to do? And she's saying, look, we've just had a small argument. Don't worry, he'll come back. It's not a big issue. But understanding, as I've said before, that the pressure that can be on these farmers, like anyone in any community, if someone's in that state of mind, you are very concerned. In rural Australia, in the New England area, you might be driving down the highway and see a blue tree. They got an old eucalypt and they paint them blue. And it's to trigger the people driving by to say, hang on, I need to check in with a mate of mine. Maybe he's been a bit off. Perhaps he hasn't been as social as he used to be. And you ring him and say, are you okay? And have those conversations. So the fact that Matt rung up one of these people, the other person on the phone knew he had to do something. So he rings the police. The police go to the farm. And Matt's very apologetic. He says, look, I was being stupid. Head wasn't right. And hands over his guns. And that's a normal process, because whilst your head isn't right, the police will take away whatever you could use to harm yourself. Then he checks into Banksia in Tamworth, which is a mental health facility at the hospital in Tamworth. Now, Tamworth is the Nashville of Australia. It is the country music capital. At least that's how they sell themselves. You can go get your photo taken at the Golden Guitar if you're traveling through Tamworth. But they have a really good health facilities there, and Matt is checked in. And after a little bit of time there, they say, look, you're right to go. And he leaves that facility. The thing is, though, as many people would know, if someone has tried to take their own life, it's not that uncommon for them to try again. Now, if he didn't have access to his guns, he would have to find another way. So on the surface of this, despite the will, it would look that this was one of those absolute rural tragedies. So it is surprising then that the moment the police turn up on the scene, and interestingly here, the police weren't the first on the scene. The paramedics obviously arrived first. And one of those paramedics that turned up on the scene was Natasha Darcy's ex-husband. And I just want to make a statement here that he is in no way implicated or involved in this situation in any way whatsoever. The town only has 3,000 people. You are not going to have that many trained paramedics on call in Walcha. The fact he was a trained paramedic meant he was likely to be the one turning up on the scene, and there is no suspicion on the ex-husband at all here. But he does try to save Matt Dunbar's life that evening, but it was unsuccessful. But when the police turn up, they straight away immediately turn this into a homicide scene. And 3 months later, after an investigation, they arrest and charge Natasha Darcy with murder. Was this just a case of small town syndrome? Were there just rumours swirling about Natasha and the will? And so the police went after her unnecessarily in a malicious prosecution. Well, this goes to trial and ends up in the New South Wales Supreme Court. Now, there are police interviews out there if you wish to Google them and look them up. I don't have access to them, but they do paint an interesting picture. But we are going to look at the key pieces of evidence and the arguments raised by the prosecution and the defence, and then we'll give you what the jury concluded. Firstly, the beneficiary of the will. Now, it said Matt Dunbar had an estranged relationship with his mother, and most people in town would attest to that. There's no real reason given as to why, and I'm certainly not speculating on it, but in the will, he is leaving everything now to Natasha. Whereas previous, he was leaving a lot to like charities and to a boarding school that he went to. So it was a big change when Natasha enters his life. But if you're in a committed relationship, is that not something that a reasonable, rational person would do? Well, the prosecution, though, point out that she was lying by saying that she didn't know that she was the beneficiary. In the police interviews, they're asking her who benefits from the will. She goes, I don't know. But there's evidence to prove that she did know. She said she never saw the will, but they found the will in the filing cabinet and her fingerprints were on it. They had the evidence that 2 people had heard her on the phone talking to Matt saying, make sure you change that will. So that seems very suspicious to turn around now and say, I never knew about it. Yet, the defense can rightly point out that it is a small town and people will talk. And so you would know that after being in a relationship only for a short amount of time, she'd only been living on the property not that long. Remember, she'd been away from Walcha for 18 months and just came back. People would talk, no doubt about it. They're going to be making assumptions that she's a gold digger. She was only in that relationship for what she could get. And now she's only been there a short amount of time and she's going to inherit this 4th generational farming property. And she's not even a local person from Walcha. Well, that would grate on lots of people in these small towns, absolutely. And so if you knew people were going to be talking about you like that, you would yourself deny the fact that you knew that you were going to inherit it. So that's, rather than looking like deception, you could easily make that look like it's a reasonable thing that anyone would do in her situation. Moving on to the next thing, though, were the sedatives found in Matt Dunbar's system. They did a toxicology report and he had a huge cocktail of drugs in his body. And the police say that with that amount of drugs, he could not have set up the thing he did with the bag and the helium. He would have been too out of it. There's just no chance. Also, they say there's RAM sedatives in there. And there's an interesting thing that the police found out about these RAM sedatives. Natasha Darcy had gone to the local vet in Walcha saying, we need to buy some RAM sedatives. But now the vet knows Matt and also knows the season when she was asking for it, realizing that that was an odd request. So she gets on the phone to Matt Dunbar and says, Natasha's in here wanting to buy RAM sedatives. You sure about that? He's like, I don't know what she's doing that for. We don't need RAM sedatives at the moment. So she's denied the sale. But then the police have dug further and found out she went to a nearby town of Armadale, which is another big town nearby, goes to the vet there and says, I need some RAM sedatives, and they do sell her the product. But when they write down, because you've got to record these things because it's fairly toxic, potent gear, she doesn't give her name and doesn't give the right address. And so the police say, see, she was being deceptive here in trying to buy something to knock Matt Dunbar out. But now the defense could easily counter that. Absolutely. Because they could say, well, look, with the amount of drugs you say that were in his system, well, you know, he would have tasted that. I mean, how did she administer it? Apparently in a drink. Well, the spoon would have had to have stood up in the drink with that amount of gear in it. And so there's no possible way a reasonable, rational person would not have known it. He must have taken it himself. And they found a little Nutribullet thing. Now, I don't know if that's what you know that is, but a little food processor was found in the dishwasher. The police took that and they said, see, this is what they use to mix the gear up in. Well, fair enough then, but why on earth, if Natasha planned this, if she wanted to knock him out, she had all the time in the world to close that dishwasher and press the button and watch the thing. Why was it left? So rather than deceit, it sort of looks like, well, she was honest about it. And buying of the RAM sedative, Well, at the time, Matt said they didn't need it, but is that to say that he didn't, down the track, didn't send her, and she's not going back to the local one in Walcha after getting denied service, because you know you're not going to get it there. And the person at the shop counter could have easily have just got it wrong. Because surely you've been in that situation. You're just recording your details and the person at the counter's not getting it right. And you go, yeah, sure, I'm Mickey Mouse from Disneyland. Whatever you need to put down on that piece of paper to get me out of the store. That could have happened. So, was she really doing this? Was it possible? Well, if I'm the defense, I'm going to be trying to raise some doubt on that particular topic. Well, then they bring up the helium that was bought. Now, again, the police do some digging, and they find out that it was Natasha that rung the store. But what is interesting, the store person who took that phone call remembers it clearly because it was odd in their mind. Because when you're selling helium, the store person said normally someone would ring up and say, I'm having a kids' party, it's 100 balloons, how much helium do I need? And we'll tell them how much helium and sell them that amount. But this person rung up saying, I need a certain sized bottle of helium, and it needs to be pure helium. So if you're having a kids' party, why are you concerned about the quality of the helium? You just want your balloons to float. So that raised a flag in this person's mind. But then Matt was sent in to pick up that bottle of helium. And he is seen on CCTV loading it onto the back of the ute and having a conversation with the person at the shop saying, yeah, we're having a kids' party and this is why we're getting the helium. But the fact that it was Natasha that organised this bottle, making sure it was the right type of helium, is very suspicious. But now as defence, they could easily turn around and say, well, look, you've got her phone, you've downloaded her call logs. She didn't make that call to Gasworld or Supergas or wherever they bought it from. I think it was Supergas. Not important. The thing is, she did not make the call from her mobile phone. The phone call was made from the landline phone at the property. So that call could have been made by anybody. But the police point out that she's got screenshots of that particular type of helium on her phone. But she says, but Matt, he uses my phone. You know, he did that searching, not me. And again, if you're in a committed relationship, it's not that uncommon to share your device. Someone says, hang on, I just need to look up something. And she said that Matt's phone had internet problems. And if you do live in rural Australia, that is a significant thing. Some phones are better than others, depending on if it's newer and all that. So some will get better service. So it's easy to see how that it would raise doubt in a jury's mind, particularly if she really was setting this situation up. But the fourth thing that really is of note is the Google searches that she made. And I could go through this massive long list, and some of them are absolutely horrifying. But it starts off how can you kill someone to suicide, and how you can make something look like suicide, or how someone can get the job done. And in fact, on her phone. So Matt Dunbar had an interesting injury, and he was getting treatment for it. Something had happened to one of his calf muscles on his leg. And there was a potential he could even lose mobility in his leg or even lose the leg. And for a farmer, that would be really difficult to deal with and getting around getting all your work done. And so this was weighing on him. And there are pictures of him on crutches in that hospital with Natasha Darcy because he went to see a specialist about this leg injury. Now, she was telling people that he was really down and the prognosis wasn't good, but the doctor said, well, actually the prognosis was rather good and it looks like he was going to have a full recovery. So there was a discrepancy there of opinions, and she was at the appointment, so she would have known what was exactly said. But whilst they're at that hospital, twice on YouTube, she had watched a video on how you could end your life with a bag and a bottle of helium. Now, why YouTube have that sort of stuff up there, I don't know. There must be a good reason for it, but I would not encourage anyone searching for that sort of thing. But she says, I wasn't the one looking it up. It was Matt. He borrowed my phone again. Yet, the police have her on the camera with her phone at the exact time when those videos were being watched, and it was in her hands. So, that also doesn't look very good. She also, in the investigation, did not want to hand over her phone. She said, you could look at my messages and call logs, but not my internet history. The reason for that is, she said, I've been set up before. People have misconstrued the internet history. And as the defense rightly pointed out during the trial, it's not that uncommon for people to share devices. Some of these searches were on the family computer, and the kids could have been looking up things like poisonous mushrooms and poisonous animals because they were new to the rural environment, like living on a farm. And so you may need to know, well, what is harmful and what's not. So whether or not that in itself is conclusive proof of guilt, well, that would be a matter for the jury to really strongly consider. Now, there was a little bit more evidence presented, and it was called tendency evidence. And did Natasha Darcy have a tendency to perform a crime such as this? Like attack someone for their own financial gain. And there was a little bit of evidence to suggest that this could have been the case, but a lot of it was not allowed to be presented at the trial. But with all that information, what do you think? If you're on the jury, are you saying guilty or not guilty? Do you have reasonable doubt? Well, the jury did retire, and it took them a little while, but they come back with the verdict, guilty. And Natasha Darcy is sentenced to 40 years in prison for the murder of Matt Dunbar. Now, do you think that passes the pub test? Was justice done? Well, the information that I've held back here, and I think there's a critical bit that would have steered the jury to that particular guilty verdict, was right at the start of the trial, when you got to stand up and plead. So it said to her, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty? She says, not guilty of the murder of Matt Dunbar, but guilty to assisted suicide. That shocked everyone. The assisted suicide was not on the table of charges. So you really can't plead to a charge that you haven't been charged with. But that sort of made it seem like the defense were going to go down that line and present evidence that she helped, but it was not murder. But that reasoning never got mentioned at all. The jury never heard any evidence along that line. And the judge, at one point, the defense team in closing arguments tried to present it, and the jury were kicked out of the room. And the judge said, look, you can't go down a path for something that you have no evidence on, and why did you mention that at the start of the trial? But I think, in my mind, if I'm on the jury, I'm going to say, well, this person is admitting some guilt. So any reasonable doubt I may have had would be gone. But was that just a monumental blunder by the defense? Like, was that just ineffective counsel? Or was justice truly done in this case? Well, let me go through some of the things that were not mentioned during this trial. And trust me, you want to hang on to your hats for this, because this story is far from over. And I will say I have looked up a lot of sources for this particular video, but the best source I found, which really paints the whole picture of this and captures the essence of it, is a book by Emma Partridge, which is entitled The Widow of Walcha. And why I really like that book, and if you want to know more, and I'm not covering everything in this, by the way, I'm only going through about a fifth of it. She really brings out all the information, and why she can is she's an investigative journalist. So she worked for a newspaper and now on TV, I believe. But she was right involved in reporting on this case from the outset. And you actually get to see the interaction between journalists and the police and how that actually works. And also how she gets interviews and the actual, just the workings of getting all these stories together. But she also in the book captures the people in this rural town as well, like how they were feeling about the whole situation. And some of the complexities there are amazing. So it's not a dry, true crime book just going through the events. It's a story in itself. And I even learnt from reading the book, the responsibility you have when you're talking about cases like this, that there are people out there that are affected by it. And so you really do need to be respectful and make sure that you dignify the people involved. Absolutely. So if you want more on this, and I would encourage you to, just for so many different reasons, go check out that book. I hope to remember to put a link in the description. But let's keep plowing on, because how Natasha Darcy ended up in Walcha was she had 2 children. She was a single parent. She met her husband, who becomes her ex-husband, but he is going through a bit of a change in career, and so he's now becoming a paramedic. And New South Wales is a very big state, and there's lots of little small communities around. So if you want to get into something like being a paramedic, you will sometimes be sent to the middle of nowhere. And he was sent to a little town called Mungandai, which is even smaller than Walcha. But it's right on the New South Wales-Queensland border, and it's basically right on the edge. You're not too far away from the Australian outback. But you're a long way from Sydney. I think it's 10 hours or so drive straight. But he used to go visit Natasha every chance he got when his shifts allowed. But once you do a certain amount of time in these small places, you will get reassigned. And so a posting to Walcha came up. And that's not that far from Sydney. You're probably only 4 or 5 hours away. And so he took up that. But then Natasha moved out to Walcha with him, and they bought a house. But things weren't necessarily all that good on the home front. Without going into all of the ins and outs of it, Natasha probably wasn't conducting herself in the best way as regards a married situation. She was saying bad things about her husband behind his back. And she was also doing some odd Google searches about how you could probably cash in some life insurance and how you can get away with murder, basically. And being a paramedic, one night, she asks her husband, where would you have to hit someone on the head, and how hard would you have to hit them to kill them? Just interesting dinner conversation. It's just funny because being a paramedic, everyone probably assumes you know all that, but you probably know how to fix someone who's been hit on the head, but you might not necessarily know what's going to cause the biggest injury. You just know how to treat them. And so he goes, look, I don't know. They're probably, round the back there. So one night, he's asleep in his bed, and he feels this massive whack on the head. He's screaming for Natasha to turn on the light. Now, whether he knew she was in the room or not, don't know, but He hears something drop on the ground, then someone scurrying for something, and then running out of the room. The police arrive because she's in hysterics now. Natasha's run out the back. She's in hysterics in the backyard saying, someone's attacked us in our house. Someone's broken in and hit my husband on the head. And now I chased him out of the house. I saw this shadowy figure and they've jumped out the back fence. Well, they find the hammer that was used to hit him on the head. It was the same hammer that was dropped on the ground by whoever hit the husband on the head. And oddly enough, it was the only item missing from the shed. So the person's gone into the tool shed, grabbed the hammer, and the story just doesn't look very good for Natasha at all. But at this point, no charges are laid against Natasha, though the police have reasonable grounds to suspect that he may have had something to do with this. Or she may have had something to do with this. But another event happened as well where she's decided to cook him a nice meal. I think he's sitting down to watch some sport. So she makes oysters kill Patrick. Now, if you don't know what oysters kill Patrick are, they're fairly common in most restaurants in Australia that sell oysters, but they weren't an Australian invention. They were actually first made in San Francisco in the United States, but for some reason it became very popular in Australia and New Zealand, and you can still find it as sort of a bit of a retro item on menus. And all it is a bit of fried up bacon and some Worcestershire sauce on a cooked oyster. Now, the story goes that some restaurants will try and sell their fresh oysters once they start going bad as oysters kill Patrick by cooking them, by putting the bacon and Worcestershire on. You can't taste the difference, and therefore oysters kill Patrick, if that sort of wordplay makes sense to you. But that certainly was the case when it came to what Natasha served her husband. So he's had a munch on this one oyster, and then he's spitting it out and he's washing his mouth out and he's like, what on earth is wrong with this? And he goes to work. He's talking to one of the blokes at work and he says, look, Natasha cooked me these oysters, and his mate goes, is she trying to kill you? How can you mess up oysters kill Patrick? Should have been another flag. But then, not long after all of this, a fire starts inside the family home. Now, she gets out with the kids, but when the police and fireys turn up, she's got some petrol on her pajamas. And they say, where did that petrol come from? Oh, I kicked over the can that was in the bedroom. So there's a petrol can inside the bedroom. She's kicked it over. What on earth are you doing with petrol in the bedroom? But they get the husband out before the whole place burns down, and the whole place doesn't burn down, but it's very badly damaged. They get him out, and he's as groggy as anything, and they do tests, and he's been drugged up. So he's been made super drowsy. The house is caught on fire. There's petrol in the bedroom. Previously, he's almost been tried to get poisoned with oysters and then hit on the back of the head with a hammer. They charge her with attempted murder and arson. Now, you would think that is a slam dunk. They've got all the evidence to show that she's done this. But the husband actually decides to defend his wife. Now, there could be many reasons for this, and I am not going to speculate on too much, but I think there's two definite things why he would have taken that action. Firstly, the kids. Now, he loved the kids, and even though they were not his biological children, he'd had a fair bit to do with their upbringing, and sending the mother to prison was not going to help them at all. But also, if she gets charged with arson, well, there's no insurance money either. And that house is now damaged massively, and you've got a huge debt to pay, and you're never going to pay it back. So that would also, no doubt, have probably weighed heavily in the decision-making process. But because he is now supporting her 100%, the prosecution offer her a bit of a sweetheart deal. They say instead of attempted murder, we'll call it assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and arson. She pleads guilty to both those charges and is sent to prison for 9 months. And during that time in prison, the husband actually takes a year off work so he can be there for the children. Natasha comes back to Walcha, and not long after that they have split up. But also, Natasha now has a third child, which is the biological child to her husband there. She has another relationship with someone for a short amount of time, about 12 months, but then starts going out with Matt Dunbar. Why did she leave Walcha for 18 months is an interesting question when she just starts this relationship with the farmer. Well, it's because the bloke that she had a relationship with in between, she caught up with him not long after starting this relationship with Matt Dunbar and said, can you take me to Armidale, this other big town, because I've got some things to do and I need a lift. And he's doing the right thing, saying, yeah, no worries, give you a lift. No hard feelings from whatever happened in their relationship. She sees his credit card in his wallet, takes it out, and then goes on a spending spree. She's bought computers, electronic tablets, all sorts of things, a new wardrobe from one of the clothing stores. Now, the following day, he gets a notification to say, your credit card is overdrawn. And he now knows what's gone on when he finds out where all the spendings have happened. They've got Natasha on CCTV at all these places using the credit card, and that is a violation of her parole because she's not that long out of prison for these other charges. And so she then goes back to prison for 18 months. And that's what she was doing in Sydney. It's interesting because at the trial, neither the prosecution or the defense could have any of the witnesses on the stand, any of the people being interviewed at court, mention that she was in prison. That would have led to a mistrial because that was considered prejudicial against her. And so they had to dance around that subject and just say she was away. But then she's come back. And not long after that, all these events happen out at Pandora. And Matt Dunbar is now deceased. And hence the tendency evidence. She has a tendency to attack a close partner for financial gain. And that was information that wasn't fully expressed at the trial. But what is absolutely astonishing about this case, which seems like such a slam dunk, which it is, justice was done in this case as much as it could be. The police themselves say she could have got away with this. They said, had she moved interstate, or even just far enough away where the local police and local people didn't know this backstory, didn't know this history, she could have found another farmer, done the same thing, and they may have missed it. Because what actually had happened is that the local sergeant who investigated this initially was at the local show. So we have these carnivals in these small towns and all the people from the farms come in and show their cattle and the kids get to go on rides and everything. But in a small town like that, you know the police. And so the locals were going up to this sergeant saying, we're really worried about Matt. We think Natasha is going to do something to him. And because he heard it that much, well, then they started a investigation. They had a task force in place investigating whether or not Natasha would do something to Matt Dunbar. And so when they get that call, they're horrified. They're like, we did not move quick enough. What did we miss? They did not expect her to act so quickly. But because when they turn up on the scene, they are very suspicious. they turn it into homicide scene straight away. They see the Nutribullet in the dishwasher that could have been missed. They make sure a toxicology thing is done immediately. They check all the CCTV where she could have been and ring the shops so that they talk to the people, and we're only talking like a day after, so that their memories were fresh and they could get their statements before they got clouded. And without all that evidence, without that immediate action in that first 48 hours, they're saying she could have got away with it because you could have raised reasonable doubt without that. And that is quite scary when you think about it. But that is the story of the widow of Walcha. And as I say, that I've only scratched the surface on this. If you want more, then dive into that book by Emma Partridge, The Widow of Walcha. It truly is quite enlightening, as I say, not just about the case, but in how a lot of these things get reported on. So check that out if you want to. But that is the end of the pub test for 2025. And I want to thank you all for your genuine support over the last 12 months. In fact, over the last 2 years. We're almost coming up to 2 years of the pub test. And I've got some stuff planned for the new year. Already got some cases in the works and some Jack the Ripper content still coming. I was hoping to do some collaborations, but I still am trying to work on them as well. But still, there is lots planned for the new year, so make sure you check it out as it comes along. I hope all your families are well. I'm Owen, this is the Pub Test, and until next time, be kind to one another.